So I'm actually going to start with recommendation 4. And I have 2 reasons for that. One is that this is the goal, right? All of the strategies, the decoding strategies, the comprehension strategies, everything, the fluency building. The goal of all of those strategies is to get them to the place where they can read challenging text, right? So the text, this is the ultimate purpose of using those other instructional strategies. But also, I think this is something that is that this showed up in several of our thinking traps. Thinking traps around text, around challenging text, around demotivating kids by giving them challenging text is one of the most important things that we can do with our 4th and 5th grade teachers right now. We can help them get over those thinking traps, escape those thinking traps, get over the barriers to using challenging text, because this is actually one of the most important recommendations. So a stretch text, as defined in the practice guide, is a selection that is challenging for students to read on their own, which means they're above their independent reading level. A lot of teachers are very uncomfortable with this. A lot of teachers have been, kind of grown up, even if they've moved away from reading levels or leveled readers, they still believe that they should always have kids in that independent or instructional zone where things are very comfortable for them. And the fact is, they are not going to make as much growth if they're always reading at that level. Now, when Nell talked about pleasure reading, reading outside of the home, extra reading, all that can be at an easier level. That's great. They can read whatever they want, graphic novels, whatever is fun for them to read. That's great. But in school is the time when they have teachers and peers there to support them in reading more challenging texts. So the best use of our instructional time is to do that work with them. And give them an opportunity to build their muscles in those more challenging texts. And so this is one of the reasons that our thinking traps don't work, because we say, oh, they learn to read. But every year in elementary grades, the texts get harder. So there are 20,000 new words in grade level texts each year, and 90% of those new words are multisyllabic. 60 to 80% of them are derived forms of other words. So if you know the word natural, you might not know the word denaturalization, right? There are longer words than others. And new words are carrying the meaning of texts, particularly informational texts. So we have to keep them working in challenging texts just to keep them on the stair step to success that they'll need to be on to graduate 5th grade and get into elementary school. And there's lots of research that shows that the challenging texts are good because they introduce new content. That content area learning happens with challenging texts because they bring in big challenging ideas, sophisticated content area vocabulary, and long complex sentences that they need to figure out how to break apart and make sense of. If they don't get opportunities to do this in the classroom with their teacher, they're probably not going to end up doing it on their own. Unless they just have, a crazy literacy professor mom who makes them do it. But this is our opportunity to help them learn how to use these. And I have all these weightlifting images because that's really how I see it. You don't get stronger lifting weights that are easy to lift. You get stronger lifting weights that are a little too heavy, right? Not crazy heavy, you don't want to get crushed, but just a little bit heavier than what you would normally pick up and carry around. And there's tons of research on this. It's also summarized in the practice guide, but basically opportunities to do that reading in challenging texts improve students' confidence and motivation. Oftentimes teachers have the opposite worry, right? That giving them something hard will demotivate them and make them hate reading, but the opportunity to be successful with challenging text has the opposite effect. If you can scaffold them appropriately to have a successful experience, that's motivating. It also helps them build their reading fluency and stamina. It doesn't do it in the moment. In the moment, they might read slower because it's a harder text, but over time, they will be able to read harder and harder texts with fluency. It also gives them opportunities to build their world knowledge and that background knowledge because they're able to read a wider variety of texts that are more challenging on more topics. And ultimately, this improves their reading comprehension as well. So we want to do this. We know that better readers read more, that having background and that reading more increases your background knowledge and makes reading easier. So it's a cycle that we want to help kids enter into by the end of the elementary grades. But oftentimes kids are not able to read the target or grade level texts on their own, and then teachers aren't really sure what to do. Have you seen this avoid in-class reading as much as possible? Yeah, have you seen read the hard text aloud to students? Now, let's not say reading aloud is bad. Reading aloud is still good in 4th and 5th grade, but not to replace the, the students' opportunities to read, right? Replacing challenging texts with easier ones, or matching students to texts at their instructional level. But the only thing that actually works is the bottom. So everything else we're talking about today is number E, provide instructional support for reading difficult texts. And I think, and what that means is understand, so especially in middle school and high school, there's a lot of reading aloud, there's a lot of avoiding assigning hard texts. We wanna make sure that we are not doing that, we're not taking those away. And so there's a way, so when we think about how to support teachers, readers in difficult texts, we want to think about our readers and where they are. Oftentimes they have more reading skills than we give them credit for. For example, in my projects, I work with schools, I work for 5th grade teachers in schools that are in major urban areas that are often socioeconomically disadvantaged, and where most of the students in the school are below fluency benchmarks, maybe in the 10th to 25th percentile on standardized tests of reading. All of those kids can read most two-syllable words when I sit down and assess them. What gives them trouble is actually new, like longer multisyllabic words that are 3 or more syllables, or new vocabulary words. So we want to really think about what kids can do, and determine our instructional goals for getting them that next step forward. We also want to think about what makes a particular text challenging, and then consider the instructional support and tasks that we're asking kids to do with that text. And when we're thinking about selecting texts, we can think about the difficulty of the concepts, the difficulty of the vocabulary, the background knowledge, whether this is a familiar topic for students, and then a smaller level, like quantitative measures like lexiles as well. So this first recommendation is really is highlighted a couple of different places in our 4 or 5 essentials, particularly in Essential 2, intentional research informs instruction using increasingly complex texts and tasks that build comprehension, knowledge, and strategic reading activities. So this idea that we're on that staircase of text complexity, that we're trying to move kids along to something harder, is baked into Essential 2. Activities that build reading fluency and stamina with increasingly complex text, it's there again in Essential 4, and it's again in 8, abundant and diverse reading material, including digital text and opportunities to read outside the classroom. So it's baked in there, in that we don't want kids to just read one type of book. We don't want them just reading graphic novels or just reading their favorite series, although having a favorite series is fantastic. But we want an abundant and diverse reading experience for our students. We want educators to know what stretch texts are. And we want to know them, we want to know, or they can use a different term. The terminology is not key. It can be challenging text. It can be, you'd have a different term for it in your district. But, and then why this is important for reading and development. Why it's actually important to not do the thing where you're like, well, I was going to read this book, but it's a lot of work and the kids don't seem to like it, so we're just going to watch the video instead. Like, why is it important to just resist that temptation and really understand that? We want them to choose text for their instruction intentionally based on their instructional goals, identify the things that are going to be challenging in that text, and provide the support that students need to be successful in the text. And then finally, we want them to be the teachers who teach the texts, be the 4th or 5th grade teachers, be the English language teachers who still teach books, and interesting books and challenging books, and teachers who believe their students can do it, who believe in their students and know that they can support them.